Hey TCSTV viewers, it's Dave and Evelyn coming to you from the camera store live tonight for a very special virtual talk about making photo books for publication.
Yeah, this is a really interesting topic for us. You might be thinking all these photos you're taking, you want to put into a book to give to loved ones or friends or family, or maybe you actually want to go and get a book published.
Yeah. Well, and before we get into our main topic tonight, I want to let you know about a few things that we have going on. And first of all, I want to thank our TCSTV live dream team, which is Drew and Gary and Riley from the camera store. They always make sure that everything goes super smoothly, and they always do a good job to make sure that we don't have any issues. But of course, we are live tonight, so anything could happen, and we appreciate you guys being here with us. Of course, if you have any comments tonight for our guests or for us, you can do so by commenting in the live chat if you have a YouTube channel account. If you don't, you can also email me. It's evelyn@thecamerastore.com, and I've included that in the description below.
Yeah, and we are very fortunate tonight. We have Dr. J. Ashley Nixon with us, and he is going to take us through his process of putting together some photo books, and he's done a ton of them in recent years.
Yeah, and before Dave officially introduces Ashley, we're going to talk about a deal that we have from the camera store. And since we're here tonight, we do have a special. It's 20% off our entire photo book collection.
Every book.
Yeah.
Wow.
And you have to be in Canada because we only ship within Canada. But there's also a link in the description down there. And if you registered for the event tonight, we'll also email that to you tomorrow morning. But basically, if you're in the market for a photo book, you can save 20% off up until the evening of Saturday, April 10th. And we also do free shipping for orders over $100 as long as it doesn't become an oversized package.
Yeah, we have an incredible selection of books in our library here.
Yeah.
So let's get to it. Dr. J. Ashley Nixon is a photographer, filmmaker, writer, and university teacher. He has written 11 books, including several photo books about female hockey players, rugby, cosplayers in Canada, and his trips to Peru and different communities down there. We're excited to talk to Ashley on this topic and think that his story will give you some inspiration to make your own photo books. So thanks to you for joining us. Thanks, Ashley, and we're looking forward to hearing what you have to say.
Thanks very much, Evelyn and Dave, and thanks for having me in the camera store tonight. What I would like to do in this short session tonight is take you through what I think my 5 steps for making photo books for publication, and along the way tell you a little bit about my own books and some of my own photographs, and also include some of the work of 5 photographers that I've chosen, some male and female photographers, that contemporary photographers, and also some of the masters. The 5 steps, and it seems a bit like Sesame Street, the 5 Ps here, but there's an alliteration here of purpose, planning, process, publishing, and promotion. Difficult to get through those, but that's my framework for making a photo book, and I'm going to take you through each of those steps as we go along. Before I do that, I want to make a couple of points, and first of all, and this is coming from really a definition of a photo book, and it comes from a really good authority on photo books, and the name is Martin Parr. You'll probably many of you know about his work, but also you might not know that he has a massive collection of photo books, and it's still growing, and he really is an authority on photo books as well as being a great photographer. And the first point is it says that a photo book could have text or could not have text, and I've had photo books where I've had lots of text in them and others where I've hardly any, so that's sometimes a contentious issue, but there we have it from Martin Parr. The other one is what do we call them? Do we call them photography books? Do we call them photo books, or do we actually combine those 2 words and make it a photo book? And it's interesting that actually a few years ago I had the great privilege to photograph Stan Lee when he was in Calgary. The inventor of the Marvel characters and the comics, and he always made a big thing about insisting it should be comic books, which is 1 word. So I'm going to go with photo books with 1 word, at least for tonight. First part of that series is or framework is purpose, and why do you want to do a photo book? And it's quite interesting, this photograph here. It's taken in the coach just before the players got off the coach to play a game of hockey in Montana, just across the border in the USA. Coach Mark Maloney is a great hockey coach, and just look what he's got there on his on his notebook there, or his book there, saying, "Make mistakes, no fear." I think that's relevant to photography at large, and it's certainly relevant to making books. I think a lot of us have a hesitance to actually get in there because the world's going to see it. Well, make mistakes, get on with it, learn from the first one, put that learning into the second one, and off you go. So the purpose, I've got 2 or 3 slides to talk about purpose. So what are you trying to achieve here? Have you got some content to share with your audience? Indeed, what is your audience? A really good thing for photography is, we all stick so many photographs, thousands and thousands, in our computer. Well, why don't we get them off the computer? And a book is a great way of delivering them to an audience. And it's certainly a way of demonstrating your body of work, or your accumulating body of work as a photographer. Photobooks may also be a supplement to an exhibition, so a catalogue in effect, which supports the photographs that are on a wall. But I think that it also stands up as an alternative to exhibitions. And when you weigh up the costs of exhibitions, and certainly the difficulties that we have now with COVID-19, that an exhibition may only run for a few days or a few weeks, well, there's more longevity in a photo book, and perhaps it's a good alternative that we should think more carefully about when we're trying to put work out into the public. And it is an important thing, because really, as photographers, it's not about what you make, it's about what you share. That's the crucial thing, I believe, in photography. This photograph again was on a road trip to Montana, and whilst I've done several books about female hockey, I've always made them books about development, about young people developing as athletes, as human beings, and to try and show other things other than girls scoring goals or goalies saving goals and so on. And so telling a story, and perhaps it's your own story, it's your own narrative or interpretation of that story, or indeed it may be somebody else's story, that you have a narrative or an interpretation about their story. It's certainly about, for me, it's making a record of something that's happened, and I have an interest in history. I want to make a record of what's been done, and that's there with you for years to come. So there's certainly value there on the bookshelf or wherever it is. And also, and as you'll see in some examples that I'm going to share with you, it's a great bridging between films and photographs as a book. And I've actually explored that in some of the projects I've done in Peru, where I've set out, my project plan has been to do a film, to do some photographs, and to make a book about that experience. Now here's the first of contemporary photographers that I'll say something about, and his name is Rob Darch. He's a British photographer. He lives in the southwest, in Devon, in England, and his first book that he published in 2018 is called The Moor, and that was produced by a small independent publisher called Another Place Press, that are based up in Scotland, and Ian Sargent runs that very good publishing house. And Robert had his first book published there, but he made a conscious decision that in his second book he wanted to go alone. He wanted to be a self-publisher, but at the same time he wanted to have an independence from his own name, so he set up this company called Lido Books, and with the prospect in the future of bringing in other photographers to be part of his publishing house. What's also interesting about that book, and it is a beautiful book, and I'll show you one of the photographs from it in a moment. It's a short run, and that's quite significant because small publishers of photo books want to add value to their books, and by restricting the print, that perhaps raises the value of their individual publications. The other interesting thing about this book is it doesn't have a photograph on the front. It's an illustration. And I think that's pretty cool, actually. I think it's a way of interacting with other forms of art that photography really must do in plenty of situations. Not all, but plenty of situations. It's also got the minimum of words. There are no captions in that book. And the only words are really at the back, and it's an essay by Dan Cox elaborating on what this story is, which is, I'm not going to say too much about it, but even the word vale is a really interesting word there, because vale is an old version of the word valley in English. but also it means the veil that goes around you, the mask around a face. And so it's what is being hidden, what's being hidden in a landscape. And with respect to Robert Darch, what was hidden from his upbringing when he was a child, a young adult, and had some health problems, and he lost his childhood, and so he wanted to revisit his childhood through this photo book. That's what it's all about. And there is a spectacular photograph from that book. It's very rich, end of the day kind of colours. It's beautiful. Young actors playing out roles that he remembers or would like to have remembered from his childhood. So there's a bit of staging going on there. There's reality, but there's also some playing around with films and books and bringing those into the photo book. Second stage is planning, and a number of things that we might want to take into account there. And these are with respect, certainly with me, it's about words as well as images. But for some people, it may only be about the images. But planning is about what are your photo assignments going to be? What is the project? What is the opportunity to turn some work into a photo book? And that means gathering content. Now, in my case, one of the things that I've done over the years, and it's about 6 years that I've been doing this, all right? It's not a long time. And that is blogging sections of a book. I know that the book is going to come out in the future, and so I start blogging on a weekly or a monthly basis. And by the end of a year, I've got all of the content for that book that I can then revisit and bring it into the book itself. Certainly when I've been doing work in Peru, I'm not only doing interviews with the characters that turn up in my books or in my films, but I'm also having to translate from Spanish to English. And so there's a big burden there. There's a lot of work that goes into it before you're ready to publish. And in fact, I have published books which are in both English and Spanish because I want to reach out to that particular audience. And then there's going to be additional research. And certainly some of the things I've been doing more recently, I'll talk about cobbled together later on. I had to go back into photographs I took way back into 1986. So these were Fuji Chrome slide films that I digitized with my Fuji camera, right, to get the real look, the authentic feel of it. But there's a lot of work behind the scenes to get to the point when you actually have a photograph ready to publish. Let me just take a little drink here. This photograph is taken when I did a project about developing communities in Peru. It's in a place called Manchay. 30 years ago, there was no one living there. It was a desert. And after 30 years, there's 200,000 people live there. It's a superb example of how cities grow, and then the associated problems of getting water to people, giving them access to transportation so they can work, and a lot of other sustainability issues that I'm personally very interested in. That's the kind of thing I'm particularly focused on in my photography. These two boys are in a kite competition. They're flying cometas, as they call them in Peru. And this was working alongside a non-governmental organisation bringing water to these communities. So planning also is about creating images that fit with books. And here's the thing. Later on, we got to think about, well, what size of your book is it going to be? But are you just predominantly taking landscape photographs? Are there portrait format photographs that you should be also taking, so that when you get the dimensions of book, you can actually have a choice about the photograph that you actually use? And where I've come to in my own practice as a photographer now, I'm consciously thinking as I take photographs, I'm thinking, if that's going in a book, I better go to the left, I better go to the right, as well as going to the center, so I can play around with the image, particularly across the spine, which is one of the most important challenges that you have to face when making a photo book. So shooting in multiple formats is the way. I think it's a way of planning for that future publication. This is another photograph from Peru, where these people from a community called Quebrada Verde were actually breaking down the case, the shipping case, and pulling out a water pump. And someone else had drilled a hole in the ground, and they were going to put this water pump in. And for the first time in their history, they actually had running fresh water to provide for themselves in their households, and to provide the gentleman in blue. He actually has a dairy herd, and it meant that he had an economic opportunity as a consequence of bringing water to that community. So these are the kinds of things I'm interested in, where there are stories around development that I want to create books about. Planning also is about having those records, you know, the good communication standards of who, what, where, when, and why. And also something might come up in the questions, Evelyn, later on, but getting the permissions. Have you got the right kinds of permissions for the photographs that you're going to take? And then thinking beyond the book of who's going to print it, who's going to distribute it, who's going to buy it, who's going to sell it. That's the cover of the book that is about development in Peru, and that's actually not in the camera store, all right? But it's available from me if anybody's interested. A second photographer I want to refer to is Lottie Davis. She's also from Britain. Those of you who are familiar with the publication that sadly is no longer with us, Professional Photographer, she used to write the back page on Professional Photographer, Lottie Davis. So she's a good writer as well as a photographer. And what she's done with Quinn, which is about to be launched, it's going to come out in a few days' time, is really a staged situation based in the 1940s in England, where a young fella makes a trip from the south to the north of the country. And she's created these images. She's created these almost like studio situations, but with these fantastic landscapes in Britain, where she's showing that she's telling the story of this journey of this fella, which is also interacting with film, and she's got artifacts and she's got diaries and all of that. So it really is multimedia in her approach, which I think is very interesting. I do urge, encourage you to have a look at those two websites and see the kind of work that they are doing. And these are a couple of photographs from Quinn that Lottie Davis is about to launch. It's quite an expensive looking kind of publication, isn't it? Mm-hmm. With the pullouts. Yeah. We go to the process here. This is a photograph I took in Calgary, where there's a cosplayer convention, and for 3 years I was taking photographs of cosplayers. I was very intrigued in the character behind the character and why people actually put so much effort into making themselves look and act like someone else. I think it's a very interesting aspect of portrait photography, and that's what I explored in one of my books, which is available in the camera store, amongst all of these fantastic books that you have. I mean, so many. I don't know how you keep on top of them, but John Veldon does a fantastic job in curating these books. And I'll just say it now that if those of you watching, if you've never actually come into this library, do come in, because it's the best library of photo books I've ever seen anywhere. It really is superb. Process then both writing and images, and you make a choice which one you're going to do first, but in fact it's an iterative process. You're playing one thing off the other. But what about your working title? I always like to have a working title. It helps me to push through to everything. I can always change it, but I must have a working title. What about the captioning? Are you going to have captions with the photographs, or are you going to put them at the back? Are you going to keep it really obscure and mysterious by having no captions at all? These all work in photo books for sure. And then for the images, and I'm going to come into the process that I use for making decisions about both selecting, then editing the photographs, and then really important is the sequencing of those images. And this was for the cosplayer book, where a whole pile of small, 4x6 images printed out from my own printer at home studio, and putting them on the floor, putting them onto a black rug or something, or a black cloth, and just looking at the whole thing, and then starting to group and bring themes together and say, all right, this one's better than that one, but if that one was put in proximity with the next one, looking at the juxtaposition from one image to another. And I think this is one of my learnings, is that you don't just go for your best photographs in a photo book, because you've got to tell a story where you've got this cadence, this moving of the dynamics of moving up and down, rather like a Hollywood script. And it means then sometimes you actually choose a photograph you've only put 1 star on, and not the 5 stars. So I found that quite interesting.
Ashley, I have a question for you from the audience. I thought this may be a good time to ask, but when you're going through this process, would you say that it would be a similar process for creating a physical photo book than an ebook? And have you had any experience with that, or what would you imagine it to be like?
Yes, I think it's got all the same roots. And thank you for the question. It's really good that when I have done ebooks, I've always started with the concept of a physical book, and then the ebook comes on afterwards. Maybe in the future I might turn that around. But whilst there are clearly distinct advantages of ebooks, that they're cheaper, they're more accessible, I much prefer the physical copy. Because you've got them in your hands, you know, you get this and you can flick through it, you can go in whatever order you want, and it's just that holding. It's nowhere near the same kind of effect with an ebook. And also something to be aware of is that when you go from a physical book to an ebook, the formatting can be completely destroyed, and you may have an awful lot of work to do to get it looking good as an ebook. All right. This then is moving towards really the creation of what we could call a maquette or at least a draft, and sticking photographs onto pages and then playing around with the pages and getting that order, that sequencing. And this is another approach where this time around what I did was I did a whole load of much smaller, you know, like contact print size photographs. And then putting them up onto a wall, then playing around with the order of them like that. I actually quite like that approach. I found it better than having them on the floor, right? Bit less messy. But I did want to bring in some words from Nan Goldin, a very well-recognized photographer, particularly about people living their lives in New York City. And she said this: I would say that my work is editing. I think it was really interesting coming from a photographer. It's about editing. And I would say that if anyone would have taken as many pictures as me, they could be considered as a good photographer. But that's not the point. The point is what I've done with the pictures. The point is about making cinematic work out of still images. And the editing is where I feel my intelligence lies. So that sequencing, that bringing together those images to tell your story or to tell the narrative of someone else is, for me, the most fascinating part of making books. It's not actually taking the photographs, right? And this actually is one of my favorite bits of kit. It's not a lens, it's not a camera, it's a cutter. And boy, was this a good investment, just to be able to print off small copies of photographs, cut them up, and just play around. And it's just such a nice thing to have in the studio. And making photographs at the same time as doing an exhibition. This is what I did for, I recently did an exhibition of my book, Social Camouflage, this one here, where I was planning and executing on both the book and the exhibition at the same time. So it is, in a way, rather like a catalogue, although in fact the book actually goes much further than what I was showing in the exhibition. I want to turn to Robert Frank here. I cannot deny that I've been deeply influenced by Robert Frank's work. I love his approach that he took to taking photographs. Now, many people will be aware of The Americans. His iconic photo book. I mean, it's probably the most important photo book, I would say. Came out in, what was it, 1958. And really a series of, I think it's 88 images that really make a lot of commentary and stories about the social conditions of America at the times, going into the 1960s. Very few people perhaps know that he produced a book about Peru. Now, because of my big interest in Peru, that's one of the reasons I came into this one. But I think it's a fascinating short book because of what he did in making it happen. That Robert Frank went to Peru in the 1940s. He took a lot of fabulous photographs of people and landscapes and mountains and so on. And then he created two maquettes, two drafts. He kept one for himself, he gave one to his mother, and then they sort of hung around for a very long period of time. And eventually Steidl picked it up and published it. But it's well worth looking to see how did someone like Robert Frank come to putting out a book like The Americans. Well, he did it by trial and error. He did it by trying things out, making mistakes and making maquettes. And so it's really encouraging for people who are thinking about doing a photo book. You can do it. You can do it like this. Now, a few more words about design there, that you've got to make choices about how you're going to put your book together. Unless, of course, you've got a friendly, convenient designer who's working with you. Well, excellent. I've had to learn the trade myself. By learning how to use Adobe InDesign. It's the product to use, it's complicated, but once you get the hang of it, and it does take a bit of an investment of time, it's the best thing to use, in my opinion, to bring together the images and the words. But along the way in that design, thinking about how many pages do you want to have in your book. Not too many, not too few, getting just the right number. And you're going to be able to decide that perhaps on your own, or perhaps you have a few conversations with people you trust and want to share ideas with. And thinking about words. Are you going to have any words? Are you going to have no words at all? And where they're going to go. This is another picture from the cosplay series that I took of a character from one of the Mad Max movies. And that is the front cover of the cosplay book. Which is another character from actually a game called Warhammer 40k, and just amazing costumes that were created by these individuals. But design, do we go for captions? Do you put the captions with the photographs? Do you put them at the back with additional photographs? Chris Killip, for example, one of his books, In Flagranti, all the captions are at the back. There's no captions with the photographs, and it really keeps the flow of the photographs going really good. But questions like the book format, the size, is it going to be hardcover, is it going to be soft cover, all these things. And then those decisions that are going to be made on your judgment of what your audience is, who's going to receive, who's going to take an interest in what you're doing, what's the content, and really important, how much is it going to cost? Not just to print the book, but how much is it going to cost to ship it, even in Calgary, across Canada, across the world. If you haven't checked it out, it's expensive. So that might be a conditioning to actually bring down the number of pages and go for something which is a bit light and more accessible. I'll come back to the zines. Well, I'll come to the zines now. That
Ashley, we have another great question from someone named Nate Love, who is wondering if you are going to be talking a little bit about working with companies like Blurb. Is that something you're going to be covering tonight?
Yeah, I can.
Oh,
Sure. Prompt me again. Let me go through the zines, and then we should talk about that, because I've got quite a lot to say about it actually. Here's the thing about, this is the very first front cover of Life magazine from the 1930s. It's a powerful sculptural photograph taken by Margaret Bourke-White of a dam in Montana, Fort Peck Dam, and she was a woman of firsts actually, and she was the first woman to have a photograph on the on the first cover of Life, first photographer to actually being a foreign photographer to be given access to the Soviet Union. She was the first female photographer on the war front in the Second World War. So a remarkable photographer. And the other reason that I put this one in is that myself included, I'm thinking more about zines, which comes from magazines, of making zines because they're more accessible, they're more affordable, and you can quickly produce zines, whereas making a book should probably take you a lot longer. And it also is a reminder that actually, I'd say that one of he was probably the last editor of Life online before it stopped. And his name is Bill Shapiro. And Bill Shapiro puts out on Instagram probably one of the best feeds into Instagram that I'm aware of. And if you check him out every Friday, he actually explores the work of some photographer that you've probably never heard of before. So just a plug for his work. And one of my favorites is Eugene Smith. Gene Smith, probably the most famous of creators of photo essays. And these images and stories written by him and his wife, for example here, the Minamata disaster, which was about mercury poisoning in a fishing village in Japan. Just quite amazing stories, and always to be encouraged by going back to the masters, even if it's the 30s, even if it's the 50s or the 60s. And this again is why coming into this store and seeing these books, this is inspiration for making your own photo book. You have to look at the work of others and get that inspiration. Almost there for the blurb comment, I think, publishing and promotion, and let's talk about that now. So you have a number of options, if you're doing a short run of prints, and short means usually less than 1,000, short is probably going to be print on demand. And as you get to bigger runs, you go for offset printing, where you can interact with the printer and look at the proofs and make decisions about how everything looks and feels. But there's a bigger upfront investment. But if you're prepared to do that, the unit cost goes down with offset printing. But for most people who are starting out on publishing photo books, print on demand is probably the way they're going to go. And one of those examples is Blurb. Now, I got going on photo books with Blurb, and a number of my books have not been published by them. They are a printing company, right? I'm publishing them. I'm using the services of Blurb to print those books, and they will print on demand. So somebody goes into the shop, the online shop, and sees a book, mine or someone else, and makes a decision to buy it. The company will print that copy. They don't have stores, they don't have warehouses of books available to them. And so that makes it more accessible. But what you also have to consider is the unit cost. And the costs of print on demand are quite high, unless you make a decision to buy a box of books yourself and then have your own means to distribute them at your own expense. Does that answer that question, or would the viewer want a little bit more there?
No, I think that's a really good start in terms of just giving people an idea of realistically what they'd be looking at in terms of different options. But yeah, maybe at the end we can get to a few more questions in the Q&A period. And just a reminder to everyone that you can put your questions in the comments, and then you can also email me, and my email is down below. So do please make sure that you keep those questions coming in. And you can continue.
This is the front and back cover of the book, a book I published last year, Behind the Mask. This is a record of my, to go with the film, the documentary film that I produced in Peru. Small town in the Andes, high up in the Andes, called Mito, where a dance called La Wacanada is performed in the first few days of January every year. It's been danced for 500 and more years. So the cultural significance of it is very high. UNESCO has recognized the importance of that dance. And I was intrigued by the cultural aspects, of the heritage aspects of this dance, and what it meant to these people in the community, and what it meant to Peru at large. And creating these portraits meant spending many hours with these individuals, getting to know them, and getting their permissions to have the photographs taken, and then obviously action shots while they're doing their dancing. You can see my documentary film. It's on Vimeo. You can see it from my website and so on, if that's of interest to you. Publishing and promotion. There's a few things to say about that. Competitions do exist there, and they're all online. Sadly, the photo book fairs and marketplaces have just disappeared with COVID. So we've got to get out of our current predicament to get back to that kind of exposure for selling photo books. But selling them onto bookstores and of course the camera store here does take an interest in local producers of books. There are a number of people who have their work up here alongside the greats like the Man Ray and Sebastião Salgado and the rest of it. A couple of books which came out I published this year. One is Cobbled Together, And this is a combination of poetry and photography. And I actually did this with my mother, Dorothy Nixon. And now my mum is 93, and I was driven mad to get this out while she's still with us. I wanted to show her this book. I wanted to share her poetry, which had been written over the years, and very few people knew about it. And also, I'd started planning this book much more than a decade ago. Probably 15 years ago, I started thinking that someday I would put out this book. And then I was driven crazy to get it published this year, to recognise my mum's 93rd birthday. And I did it. I actually did it and had it there for her to show on that day of her birthday. But what's interesting, I think, in this one, that's a portrait I took of my mum a few years ago, is that with a book like this, you really are interacting words and images. Now, it happens to be that's one of the things I teach at Mount Royal University up the road. So I am mad driven by that interaction between words and images. But figuring out this is a big collection of photographs, and I do have a big collection of photographs from Haworth in Yorkshire, which is where I was born and bred. But choosing photographs that go with the particular poems, but not always going with them really directly. Oh, this is directly relevant. In this case, I didn't have a photograph of the hairdressing shop that my mum is writing about. I didn't have a photograph of the hairdresser that she's making reference to. But I looked and I thought, well, yeah, there's a bit of a curly perm going on there with the sheep and the reflection and so on, and it just made me smile. It made Dave smile as well there.
Yeah,
I just found that was a way of playing and having fun with images interacting with words. The latest book that I published is called Social Camouflage, that I produced throughout the year of 2020, when we all are stuck at home. We can't do these big projects. I can't go back to Peru. I wanted to. I can't go over to Britain to do my next project about the Aire Valley where I was born and bred. I'm stuck here. But what can I do? And I started to put together a diary of words. And it started with words. And you see that's from my diary at the time, of creating this ABC of words that I thought were situations or parts of our lives that had been impacted by the COVID pandemic. And then I started to create images that represented those words. And then I have a very supportive daughter who is a brilliant model, and she's very patient with me and gets involved. And I want to give a plug for Jennifer there, because she's helped as a photography assistant with me as well for a few years. She was there with me when I did the film in Peru. And there we did some portraits, studio portraits, using some backdrops that were created by my wife, Mary Carmen. We curated a set of images on backdrops. We created those backdrops, and then we created the masks with the same material. And then I brought these words back in to show this is what this image is representing, not only in this person's life, but I think collectively in our communities. And these are the impacts that we've gone through. And it's a record of what we've gone through. And some of those images I actually was exhibiting quite recently at C-Space as part of the Exposure Photography Festival, which is held in Calgary every year. It's a very good exhibition, exhibition indeed. So we're almost the end of my bit, Evelyn. Really, a couple of sort of pieces of advice. Number one, is have a go. Number one is have a go. Go for it. This is a band from Edmonton, Physical Copies. I shot that in Dickens Pub. I think you were there that night, actually.
Hey now.
I'm pretty sure, Evelyn, you were there.
I might have been.
But you know the number of shots it took to get that point. Yeah, but I knew this guy liked jumping, and I was just waiting for that moment. I wanted to get a jump. I like taking photographs of people jumping. It's one of my things when I do portraiture. I get the people to jump if they're able and willing to do it, because it sort of reveals character. So experiment and try things out and have fun, enjoy the process.
Love it.
I do want to just say one last thing, and maybe leave this one up, but just a bit of a self-plug, if I may, Evelyn, that it actually is today that I've launched Betula Books as an imprint. It's a new publishing house. I've set it up as Betula Books so that it's independent from me. It's not just about my photo books. I'm looking to bring in other artists and photographers and writers to explore sustainability themes, particularly, which is the passion that I have. And so I give you that website because I only got it live this afternoon. So you can find my books there on betulabooks.com, and you can find them in the bottom shelf here somewhere in the camera store. Over to you.
Excellent. Yeah, we have lots of questions to get through, so we'll try our best. But I'm going to start with some from the audience, and then Dave and I. First of all, I think there's a couple of people that are wondering if you could go into a little bit more detail about the economics of creating a photography book, and also a question again from Bill Braden, who is asking about the ebooks. And he said he has created some photo books himself, but it is so costly when you're maybe just creating a very small amount of them. And so can you just speak to how you're able to manage those costs and what you'd be actually looking at in Canada for some of those publications?
Yeah. So let's take the printed books first. If you're going to go for a coffee table size book and it's all full colour, as soon as you get over 40 pages, it's going to be really expensive. And it's going to be so expensive that probably no one is going to buy it at those costs by making individual print runs. So you're doing it for yourself. You're doing it for your family. You're sharing it with carefully chosen individuals. So the challenge then is how can you bring down that cost but still have high quality? And so you bring down the size, bring down the page count. You still keep with colour, but black and white is a less expensive option. So that's one to go for. And I think this is where the zines come into play there, because a zine would be 7 or 8 or 9 pages, and you multiply that by 4, it gives you 36 or 40 pages, and it's stapled, and so it's not there's not the expense of the binding. It's lighter, so the cost of distributing are less, and to put out a book like that, a zine kind of book, you're probably talking about a handful of dollars. You can get one made for less than $10. And so you've got the opportunity to add a little bit of money to that, but make it affordable, make it attractive. But when it comes to I'll show this one here. This is a book this is the Peru Community Development book. I did just a handful of those, and it was too expensive to distribute. So if I was to distribute, I would have to change. This has got the dust cover. It's hardbound. It's a large number of pages. I would have to reformat it there, frankly, to make it more economic.
Right. And I guess just to add to that, just because we've had some comments, Brad Macmillan was talking about just how a tangible photo book just has so much more value than, say, an ebook or publishing your work online. And I would absolutely have to agree with that. I mean, I've been working at the camera store for a few years now, and
did we start together?
I fell in love with the photo book form. And if you haven't looked at a photography book for a long time, I really encourage you to do that, because feeling it in your hand and seeing the photograph printed on pages just gives you an entirely different perspective on what some of these photographs actually look like.
Yeah, I mean, we're inundated with photos daily, right, on all of our devices, but to actually see it in print, and it's a whole different experience. Now, you're averaging like 2 books a year, Ashley. First off, how do you find the time, right? And are you working on multiple projects at the same time, or do you find sort of one book and you kind of focus on that primarily?
Yeah, I guess I worked so long on projects in the oil and gas industry. So I had that sort of kind of approach, and certainly I do think about the pipeline of productions of what am I doing now, where do I want to have something published at the end, and so I've got any number of things under the go at any one time. And then the drivers are various. As I mentioned, my mum's birthday was a really important driver. The other thing that happened last year, I think a big reason why I got 4 books published last year was COVID. That I think I mentioned, we can't travel, so it compels you to go back and finish off things. And what I've found, this is something which has emerged for me in this 6-year period, is that now when I go at a photographic project, I know at the end I've got to put a book out there to close it off. Can I just mention something about the ebooks as well before they'll lose the thought?
Yeah.
Because there is another option, which is creating a PDF. That as you produce the print copies, the physical print copies, it's very easy to create a PDF and sell that to people who can't afford the printed book. And in many ways, it's as good as an ebook.
Yeah. We actually have a question about zines, and where could one get a zine made? And is there any recommendations you have there that you've heard of?
So in terms of the physical process, there's one of the reasons why a zine is more accessible is that many local printers will be able to produce one for you. And if you get a relationship going with your local print shop, if you got the artwork, or they may be even able to help you with the artwork and the final product, you'll have to pay for that. But if you can create use InDesign and create the final product and send that off to the local printer, it's affordable for you to make mistakes. That you can get that printed, you can have a look at the individual copy, you can make some changes, and it's still not costing too much before you actually hit the button and say, right, now let's do a run of 50 or 100 and so on.
And then we have another question about the physical format from Nate Love, who's wondering what paperweight GSM do you recommend? And I'll tag on to that question. Over the 11 photo books that you've created, have you come to find, I guess, like a paper type or materials that you prefer to work with, and how much of that is balanced with the cost effectiveness of it?
Right, it's a great question, and I'm probably not going to quote back to you the specific numbers, but one thing that drives me crazy is it GSM or is it pounds per inch? And it's like,
right.
Oh. And so you got to work that through, and then of course, and also they're different for cover stock versus page stock. Again, they're different numbers, so be aware of that. I do advocate for having a thicker stock for your covers, for sure. And then in terms of the internal pages, one important thing, this is where doing a proof copy is really important. Actually, perhaps I should have emphasized that earlier. It really is worth you spending a fair amount on shipping costs to get one copy back, to have it in your hands to look and feel. Because what can go wrong is that if you go for really thin paper, the inks may bleed through it. And when you lift it up, particularly to light, the image at the back will show through into the front. And maybe that's not what you want. I certainly don't like that. And so that compels you to go in for thicker paper. But there comes a compromise, because the thicker it gets, the more expensive it's going to be to print it and to distribute. And so what I recommend there is that you, as you're looking at potential printers, you ask them for some samples, and Blurb will actually give you that, and they'll give you the credit when you next buy a book. So that's a good thing that they have. But other printers will give you swatches of paper, and get it in your hands and look and feel, but do those proof tests.
Now, in your photographic process, are you photographing specifically for the book and looking for certain things, and do you have a sort of the same sort of mindset? You know you're shooting for the book, or you're just shooting stuff that you like to shoot, period, and then working with those images in post anyways to see how they'll fit in?
So it starts with shooting what I want to shoot. And so just put that book to one side and to get that material. If you're in a place, particularly if you've traveled to that location, you really want to be shooting a lot. And shooting a lot of wide stuff, and I think it's really important to have close-up specifics, examples, and so on. But if you know that you're going to go for a book, ultimately, I think you do need to have a conscious thought going on there. What might this image look like in a book? And I mentioned it earlier, that this gutter problem. The two biggest challenges in making photo books is the gutter, which is inside the pages, and the spine on the cover. All right, designing spines is complicated. Right, it's getting easier, but it's still one of the most challenging parts to get right, especially if you've got text on there. But the gutter inside, if you are, and many of us do this, if we're consistently taking photographs head on instead of pushed out to the left and pushed out to the right, the most important material content in your photograph is going to be in the gutter. So you have to make, now of course you can crop and so on, but if you can avoid that cropping in the first instance of intentionally having things set to the left and the right or higher and lower, you're going to have more material to choose from when you come to actually putting the photos out. So for example, when I did my book, this book here, the Behind the Mask, right? Images in there worked for that book because of the dimensions. It's 8.5 by 11 inches in this case. But when I went to exhibit photographs from that book at CSpace, I had to change one out because it just didn't look right on an exhibition wall. So having the choice, having the content, having the material ready for you allows you to make those wise choices.
Now that kind of brings me actually to the point, like the design of a book. When it comes to choosing a cover photo, like this is the key photo. This tells me so much about what's going to be inside the book. How long and what kind of arduous journey do you have to pick out that cover picture? That's the big one.
You know, when I'm planning photo books, I'm thinking about the front cover right at the beginning. Right. And I'm getting I'm putting it into Lightroom. I'm starting to make collections in Lightroom of photographs that are to do with particular sections of a book, and then I have a section which is cover photos, and I'll start with a big number of photographs, and then I'll come down and come down to a small number, and then I'll do a test run. I'll do a proof copy. I'll print it out, or at least I'll look at PDFs online and say, well, look, how does that work? But because the important thing is, how is it going to fit with text? Yeah. And your very best photograph may not be the right one for the front cover.
I have a question in the feed from Conrad Shelley saying, going back to your interest in people putting on characters, have you as a photographer ever immersed yourself in the mindset of a character to capture or seek a photograph?
Whoa, that's deep.
Whoa.
I like it. I think that's a good question.
Yeah, it's really. And
maybe you haven't, but
it's really good.
It's an interesting idea.
It is. It is an interesting idea.
I see a new book.
And Conrad, I've not actually done that. I've not dressed up to hide my identity to actually get a photograph. It reminds me of the police in Calgary. You know, they hide behind waste bins and so on to take photographs of the cars as they're speeding past.
Right.
But I think also it brings in a bit of ethics, doesn't it?
Yes, and actually that was going to be my next question, was the question of ethics. And I think you very briefly touched on it when you said, you have to question those things on whether or not you have to ask someone's permission to photograph them. And is it at that point that you tell them that your intention is to make a photography book? And what exactly does that mean? Like, are you selling that person's photograph? Is it for documentary purposes? So can you just talk about, I guess, your process and any ethics or rules that you follow as a rule of thumb to put people in these books?
Yeah, it's full of controversy and it's complicated, and I'm not a lawyer.
Okay,
right?
Yes.
So let's get that out there. But with respect to Canada, as a photographer, you have a given right to take photographs in public places. If you are in private property, then that changes things dramatically. That you may be against the law taking photographs of people in private places, and indeed of private buildings for that matter. And an example, I remember I used to work a lot in Houston, in Texas. And if you look at the streets down, some of the streets anyway in Texas, there are little brass plaques on the concrete sidewalks which say this is private property. Not the buildings, the pathway is private property. And so you actually may not be allowed to take photographs in that situation. In Canada, we can take pictures of the police, and provided we don't interfere with what they are doing, we can take pictures of the police. But if I was to do that in Russia, it might not be against the law, but what's stopping someone hitting you over the head with a truncheon because you're taking photographs of the police? So the point there is that you need to know your law, and there are various agencies, professional photography agencies, that will help guide you through the law. But if you're going to another country, to find out what your standing is as a photographer. So put that to one side. The other one is about model releases.
Yeah, and your personal, like what are you doing actually?
Yeah, you see, I've used a combination. That when I did the cosplay book, I made a specific decision that I was going to get model releases from everyone that was in the book. It eventually was going to be in the book. So what I did was I literally had interviews with individual cosplayers. Say, look, this is me, this is Ashley Nixon, this is what I'm planning to do. I'm planning to do this book. Would you be happy for me to take some photographs of you? And then I'd be there with my iPad and go through all the sign off, and I still have those copies, take the photograph of them, get a signature, and it's very legit then to cover me to make a publication. Also, I might say though that the difference is between commercial photography and photography which is being taken for the purposes of education or information. That's an important differential to take account of. So when it came to the book I did of people in Peru, the Wacanada in the town of Mito, that was more informal. It was about having conversations with people, having interviews with those people, and say, look, we're doing this film. After the film, I'm going to put this book out. Are you okay with it? And I get a verbal acknowledgement, and then we can go. I take the photographs. But there are some specifics which I've got more wary about, and that's taking pictures of children.
Yes.
And even people's faces on the street. And I think a lot of street photographers would tell you the same thing now. When I started doing street photography, it was just, you just got on and did it. Now I'm much more reserved or conservative in my decisions about who I'm taking and what the ethical relationship is between me and the subject that I'm taking photographs of. And the last thing I want to do is put them into a compromising situation. I don't want to have this power differential there where I'm taking economic advantage of them when they're on the street. People are sleeping rough on the street and so on. But to get around that, I think it starts with a conversation. I think it continues with a willingness to be patient and have a relationship, and then say, well, look, how about it? Are you comfortable with that? Because the truth is that while model releases are the way to go, they get in the way of the process.
Yeah, that's what I was just going to ask is, you want it to be an authentic picture of the moment sometimes, and if you're coming up to them with your iPad to do a model release, that's going to take away from that fleeting moment that you may have had if you just, captured a photograph.
Yeah, and does that change how genuine the photo is going to be and the whole experience with the subject, right? Suddenly it's more formal and it's not impromptu, and you've lost that moment. So, how do you approach that? And that being said, if you're talking to a lot of people randomly, it's very awkward to walk up to a stranger the first time, right? We've done some shoots where we've gone out and just shot on the street, and it's interesting. But it takes that confidence. Now, did you always start off like that, or have you gotten much better at it, the more books that you put out?
It depends on the lens that you're using. So if I mean, I won't go on the street with a 400mm lens, but I certainly would with a 70-200. And it's a good lens to be on a street corner taking photographs of what's going on. And it works, but I much prefer to get up close and personal and use the 35, use the 50mm lens. And that demands, in my professional practice, it demands a conversation at that point. But of course, you've got to caveat that or balance that with going through that process of engagement. You may be losing that moment of opportunity. And so sometimes you are taking photographs on the fly, and then you've got to make judgments about how those photographs are being used, and if you feel that they're not compromising the situation, that's probably going to be a sign that it's okay. And if they're famous, we'll forget about it, right? But if they're not famous, then how much of their face is visible and so on. And this is a trend in street photography now. A lot of street photos you see do not show faces.
Right.
I think it's sad. I really do think it's sad, but it's a reality that street photographers have to deal with now.
Yeah. Well, I want to get back a little bit to more of the photo book side of things. And we have a few questions about if there's a certain price point that you're looking for that has sold well, or that you think that would be a good place for someone to try to hit with their first photo book.
Yeah, it's a good question.
It is.
It's a good question.
Well, yeah.
And I mean, it's one of those things of price and quality. It's always that balance, isn't it? You always want to aspire to the best quality. But good quality does not mean a large number of pages and a big coffee table book, all right? And so bringing down the size, bring it down to, that's 8.5 by, actually it's interesting, that's an 8.5 by 11, that's an 8 by 10. Strange but true, the bigger one is cheaper. And the bigger one is cheaper because that is a magazine size format. And because it's magazine format, you can get a better price on that than you can with an 8 by 10. So don't always assume that the biggest is going to be more expensive. It actually does not apply. But then bring that further down. But of course, once you get to, are you going to make a book which is 6 by 4 inches? Well, great for photographs, great for photo albums, but is it going to work as a book? Well, in some cases it does, and it's going to bring down the price. But you've got to do the calculations and the deep thinking there. There's not a formula I'm going to give you which says this is how it's done.
I mean, I wish this would be a good question for our book photo specialist, John. But I would have to say that I've seen a lot of local photographers come out with photography books, and usually they are in a smaller format, and at least in Canadian dollars, I'd say that they're probably priced around maybe the like $40 to $60 range, somewhere in there, where it still sort of seems like an affordable investment for someone, even friends and family, to purchase a copy. And so that's at least what we've seen at the camera store. But again, like photo books, they could really go up in price quite significantly when you get into hardcovers and things like that.
Yeah. With the cobbled together book there.
Sorry?
The book Cobbled Together I put out this year. I did think hard about the pricing, and it's funny actually. It ended up being 66 pages because that was the house number that I lived in and my mother lived in, right? So I was sort of mad driven to get these photographs into 66 pages, but also I was consciously thinking I want to go under 80 for this one, so that the price point is it comes in under $30 in Canada, and it's less than £20 in England, right? So I'm also doing those calculations as well, because that price point, something over £20 for people in Britain, they'd probably be less likely to spend it on the fly.
We have a question from Becca Gold. Hey, Becca. We know her. When you're creating the layouts of the spreads in your books, do you use layout software like Adobe InDesign, which I think you mentioned at the beginning, or do you work with a book publisher directly, or both?
Yeah, I use InDesign. And so I set up templates, a format for the book. So I've made a decision on what the format size is going to be, create the templates to fit with that, get the bleed lines in, get the gutters in, all of that, all the guidelines in, and then as I showed on the slides, creating these mock-ups, these maquettes, that look and feel, the sequencing and so on, before I go into using InDesign, a long way before that. And then once I've got a fairly good idea, it may not be the final idea, but a fairly good idea on what the sequence is going to be and what the number of photos are, that's when I start to load in TIFF versions of the photographs. TIFF is better than JPEGs, by the way, much better for the quality. And put those files in by really dropping them into boxes, but by setting up the format allows you to put the photographs in precise positions, and so it's a good investment of time to set up those templates before you start committing the photographs to the book.
Great. And circling back to the conversation we were having before, Shelley O and Brad McMillan were also commenting about the possibility of taking the photograph of someone on the street and then asking them afterwards if it's okay to use it in a photo book publication. Is that something that you've tried before, and has that been successful?
Yeah, it does. It works. It works really well, and I have done that. And it's actually a really good practice in many situations, where to avoid the model release burden, the barrier that it creates, that instead that you take those photographs, but you get a contact, and the important thing is that you make sure that they have got your contacts. So business card is a good way of doing it, and you get something back from them so you can make contact in the future. And also, it's in my pocket all the time. You have the book, you have the notebook, and you scribble down there, and sometimes, and this is a good practice, you actually write down the name and the email or that kind of thing. You write it in your notebook, and then you show the person that you've got that, and then you take a photograph of that. Yeah, you do it with your iPhone, you do it with your phone, and you've got that kind of record. But what it's doing two things. What it's doing is giving you a record of the situation. That if you're doing this 1,000 times a day, which you might be, right, you're going to forget this very, very quickly. All right. But also it comes across more professional.
Yeah. And I have to say, there was a photographer that we've had here before, and I had the opportunity to interview a couple of years ago, William Albert Allard. And one of the key things that I remember him talking about with street photography and talking to people is that if you take their information and you offer that you're going to send them a photograph, it might seem obvious, but make sure that you send them that photograph. It is such a critical thing. And he said, all the years that he's talked to students and people that have learned his craft, he says that's such an important way to give back and hold that respect for the person that you're capturing their image.
What I've done in a number of projects, I did this in Peru, which was the last major project. I bought a Fuji printer from the camera store, and I got the little cartridges of print, but connect that to my own camera, use the software, do the little print, and then the next day after I'd been doing all these photographs, I'd go back to these people, here you are. And I'd write on the back, I'd put my name on, I'd put my contact address or whatever. So here you are. Thank you so much for allowing me to take your photograph.
Yeah, I love that.
Now, some of these projects take you years to kind of put together. Do you have trouble kind of keeping motivated, or do you find your kind of the emotional investment kind of fluctuates as you're putting something together? I know you had some wonderful stories about the book about your mother, and I love hearing about those stories, but do you find it's tough to stay motivated and stay sort of a good pace to get these books out?
Yeah, in the main, I'm able to keep the motivation going, but you have these, for sure, have these momentary burnouts. It's a creative process, and one of the things that I do, and I do this routinely, is that when I'm doing a day of photography, and this is particularly applicable for the sports photography I've done in the past, hockey and rugby in particular, where at the end of one game, I've got 1,000 photographs, sometimes 1,500, right? And I might start the process of cataloguing on Lightroom and starting to organise. But the decisions about which ones I'm going to keep and which I'm not going to keep, I do not do that day, unless I've got a pressing deadline, you know, because and that happens as well, you know, and you just got to you got to go for it.
Yeah.
But what you actually, when you're doing that with sports photography, you're making decisions there on the field, and at half time you already know which ones are going to go out at the end of the game, right? But if you have that luxury of time, I try and avoid making big decisions about selections until I've had a sleep. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, to wrap things up for the evening, I want to come back to, I think, the best advice in your whole presentation, which is to give it a go. And I just wanted you to maybe say a couple more comments just about, I guess, encouraging people to try it and maybe just kind of get over the fact that, like, you know, I'm going to make this photo book, because to me even seems like a very arduous task. That, like, am I good enough to make a photo book? And so I guess just getting over yourself. Can you just speak to that a little bit?
Well, there's some great services like Blurb that you can. There's some great services like Blurb that you, if you want to do one book, you can do that. So if you put together a book for your husband or your wife or a loved one or your family, you can do that in a really small run. Costs you a little bit more, but you have the option to go much bigger if you want.
Blurb is so good about like that they're going to take off the burden of distribution and obviously the printing and so on, and so it's a really good place to set off if you want to have a go at making photo books. But when I started this 6 years ago, that I knew that I had this certainly curiosity, maybe I'll do this more in the future. I've got to learn the trade. I've got to learn by doing. I've got to make some books, and those first books, they were about hockey teams. I sold them on to members of the parents of the hockey teams, and that covered my costs. Made a little bit of profit to recognise the hundreds of hours that it took to create those, because they're over a season. You know, Dave, because you're doing sports photography with bodybuilders and so on, that there's an awful lot of effort goes into getting that content.
Well, these are truly labors of love for you, especially, right, when following your daughter in her hockey career and stuff.
Yeah. And it's really nice when parents actually tell you, oh, I actually looked at your book last night. And it was so nice to see what was going on 3 years ago.
Oh, fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Ashley. I think this was really enlightening. Lots of great ideas of how to get started with making your own photography books. Of course, we have, again, a link below if you'd like to explore the photography books that are on the Camera Store website. The link is down below. You can get 20% off until Saturday evening. So please do check that out. And then we have a collection of Ashley's books as well available on the website.
Yeah, we appreciate your time. You're always a lot of fun to talk with.
And if I could just say, Drew and Gary, thank you for your technical support, and they're off the camera. And,
the TCSTV dream
and
team.
Riley behind the scenes, who's been working really hard on putting the promotion blogs out and so on, and Dave and Evelyn yourselves. Thanks for having me in the Camera Store.
Thank you. Have a good night, guys.
All right, take care.